"She is gone, your grace. Miss Vivienne married the Earl of Halstead a 12-month past. She did not think you were coming back." The Duke of Thorncliffe stood in the cold gravel of his own courtyard and did not answer for a long moment. 3 years of war had taught Everard to receive a blow without flinching, and so he received this one, only tightening his gloved hand on the head of the cane he did not truly need. The steward, old Peary, had said it as gently as such a thing could be said, and still it landed like grape-shot. "A 12-month," Everard repeated. His voice came out level. "So she waited 2 years then and lost hope in the third." "She waited less than you might wish, sir." Peary's rheumy eyes flicked away, unwilling to be the one who spoke ill of the lady his master had loved. There were letters returned, reports that Thorncliffe was failing, talk of debts. The Earl offered her London and a settled house, and she took them. Everard looked past the old man to the house itself. Thorncliffe rose gray and enormous against a bruised autumn sky, its windows glazed with the last light, its chimneys smoking as though nothing at all had happened here. He had dreamed of this house through 3 winters of mud and fever, had held the memory of Vivienne's laugh in the ballroom like a coin pressed warm in his palm. That she should be gone was one thing. That the house should still stand, warm and ordered and thriving, when he had left it half-ruined and its master presumed dead, that was another thing entirely, and he had not the strength yet to understand it. "The estate does not look like it failed," he said slowly. "No, sir," and here something changed in Peary's face, a softening, an old man's helpless tenderness. "No, it very nearly did, but it did not." Everard turned his head. "Explain." "Better she should explain it herself, your grace, for it is her doing and none of mine. Miss Charlotte is in the long library. She is always in the long library of an evening, going over the books." The steward hesitated. "Miss Vivienne's sister, sir. You will remember her." He did not, in truth, remember her well. That was the shame of it, and he felt the first cold edge of that shame now, standing in his courtyard with the war still ringing in his ears. Charlotte Prewitt, the plainer sister, the quiet one who had sat at the edge of every evening with a book half hidden in her lap while Vivienne shone at the center of it. He had a dim memory of a low voice, of gray eyes that watched and did not speak, of a girl who fetched Vivienne's shawl and was thanked absently and never seen. In 3 years of dreaming of this place, he had not thought of Charlotte Prewitt once. "She is still here," he said, "at Thorncliffe, a year after her sister left it." "She never left it at all, sir." Peary said it very quietly. "Not once this 3 years." Everard walked into his own house like a stranger. The hall was warm. That was the thing that struck him first, before the swept floors and the mended windows and the fires laid in rooms that had no reason to be occupied. The house was warm, as though it had been kept warm for someone. The armor his father had hung in the great hall gleamed with fresh oil. The portraits were straight. A vase of late chrysanthemums stood on the long table where, in his memory, there had only ever been dust and a dead lamp. He passed through it all in his mud-spattered coat, the war still on him, and he felt the ordered peace of the place rebuke him for a grief he had not yet been permitted to finish. The long library door stood ajar. Lamplight spilled gold across the passage stones. He stopped at the threshold, and there she was. She sat at the great oak table with the estate ledgers open before her, a branch of candles at her elbow, a shawl about her shoulders against the draught. Her hair was drawn back plainly, a few strands escaped in burning copper in the candlelight. She was making a neat column of figures with a steady hand, and she did not know he was there. And so for a moment he saw her as she was when no one watched, a young woman bent over the accounts of an estate that was not hers, in a house whose master was dead, doing careful work that no one had asked her to do and no one would ever thank her for. "Miss Prewitt," he said. The pen stopped. She lifted her head, and her gray eyes found him in the doorway, the mudded coat, the drawn face, the man 3 years dead standing alive in the lamplight, and every drop of color left her face. The pen slid from her fingers and rolled and dropped to the floor with a small dead sound, and still she did not cry out, did not swoon, only rose slowly from the chair with one hand pressed flat to the table as though the room had tilted beneath her. "You are alive," she said. It was barely a whisper. "I am alive." He came a step into the room. "They told me at Battleows that Thorncliffe had failed, that it was mortgaged to the walls and the tenants gone and the roof falling. I made peace with losing it. I made peace with a great deal." He looked about him at the mended shelves, the oiled wood, the fire. "This is not a failed house." "No," her voice steadied by degrees, but her hand still pressed the table. "It is not." "Whose doing is it?" She did not answer that. She only looked at him, and something moved behind her steady eyes that he could not read, and he understood suddenly that he was frightening her, that she had believed him dead for a year and more, had grieved him in whatever quiet way a girl like this grieved, and here he stood muddy and alive and demanding accounts of her like a magistrate. He softened his voice with an effort. "Forgive me," he said. "I have been 3 years among men who shout. I have forgotten how to speak to a lady in a warm room." He bent and picked up her fallen pen and set it on the table between them. "The steward tells me you never left, that when your sister went to London you stayed here alone and kept my house. Is that true?" Someone had to keep it. She said it as though it were the plainest fact in the world. Vivienne could not. She was to be a countess. A countess does not stay in a dead man's ruin arguing with millers about the price of grain, and there was no one else. Your cousin came once to see what might be sold and went away again when he found there was nothing yet worth the carting. The tenants were leaving. The steward is old and could not ride the far fields. She drew a breath. So I stayed. For 3 years. For 3 years. Everard set his hand on the back of a chair to steady something in himself that had nothing to do with his leg. Why? For the first time she looked away from him down at the ledger, at her own neat columns of figures, at 3 years of labor written in her own hand. "Because it was yours," she said simply, "and because I did not believe you were dead." The words went through him like something warm and unbearable. He had told himself, riding home, that no one had waited, that a man who came back from the dead came back to an empty house and an emptied heart, and had best expect nothing. He had not expected this. A girl he had never truly looked at, saying she had not believed him dead. "Everyone believed me dead," he said. "The horse guards believed it. Vivienne believed it." "Vivienne wished it settled," Charlotte said, "and there was no cruelty in it, only a tired honesty." "That is a different thing. I read the dispatches when they came. I read them properly all the way through, and the man they described as fallen at Battleows was not you, the dates were wrong, the regiment was wrong, it was another officer of a like name. I wrote to the War Office 3 times to say so. They did not trouble to answer a woman, but I knew." She lifted her chin a little. "So I kept your house against your coming home. If I was wrong, it cost the world nothing. If I was right, you would not come back to a ruin." He crossed to the table and turned the ledger toward himself, and he read. He read for a long time in silence, while the candles burned down and Charlotte stood very straight at the other side of the table with her hands folded, expecting nothing. And what he read undid him more thoroughly than any word could have. Here was every rent, collected and recorded. Here were the debts, his father's debts, his own paid down pound by careful pound, not through some windfall but through economy so ferocious that he saw her own small inheritance from an aunt entered on one page as a loan to the estate in her own hand, marked to be repaid to Miss C. Prewitt when the estate could bear it. Here were the tenants she had persuaded to stay, the fields she had let, the timber she had sold, and the timber she had refused to sell. Here was 3 years of a young woman's life spent entirely on a house that would never be hers, for the sake of a man she had spoken to perhaps a dozen times, and who had never once looked at her long enough to learn the color of her eyes. "You lent the estate your own money," he said. "It will be repaid. You have not drawn a wage." "I am not a servant, your grace. One does not draw a wage for keeping faith." He looked up at her then, truly looked, the way he had never troubled to look 3 years ago when the whole of his sight had been full of her dazzling sister, and he saw that she was not plain at all. He had only ever seen her beside Vivienne, and beside the sun everything looks gray. Alone, in her own lamplight, in her own quiet, she had a face made for exactly this, for steadiness, for the long, patient work of loving a thing and asking nothing back. Her gray eyes were not colorless. They were the color of the sea before weather, and they were fixed on him now with a kind of braced dread, as though she were waiting for him to thank her absently and dismiss her, the way he had always dismissed her, the way the whole world dismissed a faithful woman who stood at the edge of the light. "Miss Pruitt," he said, "why did you never write to me? In 3 years, a single line. You wrote the War Office 3 times to argue I was living. You never wrote to me." The color came up in her face at last. "And say what?" she asked. "That I kept your granaries dry. A man at war does not want a stranger's accounts. And she stopped. "And you," he prompted. "I had no right." She said it very low. "You were promised to my sister. Whatever again she stopped, and this time she did not go on, and she looked down at her folded hands, and Everard understood, all at once and completely, the shape of the thing he had been too blind for 3 years to see. She had loved him. Quietly, hopelessly, from the edge of the room where the plain sister sat unregarded, she had loved him, and when he went to war she had kept faith with the whole of her heart in the only way left open to a woman who had no right to any of it. She had kept his house standing so that the man she loved would have somewhere to come home to, even knowing he would come home to marry someone else. She had done it for 3 years expecting nothing. She was expecting nothing now. "Vivienne is a countess," he said quietly. "Yes. And well suited to it, I think. She wanted London and a settled house and to be admired, and she has all 3, and I find, standing here," he was almost surprised to hear himself say it, "that I do not grieve it as I thought I would. I loved a laugh across a ballroom, Miss Pruitt. I did not know the woman well enough to grieve her. I am learning that only now, an hour home, reading a ledger." He came around the table. She held very still, as a deer holds still. "For 3 years," he said, "I dreamed of Thorncliffe, of coming back to a warm house with the fires lit and the fields in good heart and someone glad I was living. I told myself it was a soldier's foolishness, that no such thing waited for any man, and I was wrong. It did wait. Every particular of it waited: the warm house, the lit fires, the good fields, someone glad I was living. Only it was not the person I imagined keeping it for me." He looked down at her. "It was you. It was you the whole time, and I never saw you." Charlotte's careful composure broke at last, not into weeping, but into something rower, a small helpless catch of breath. "You need not say kind things to me," she said. "I did not do it to be seen. I would be ashamed if you thought I did it to be seen." "I know you did not." He took her hand. She let him, though her fingers trembled. "That is precisely why I am saying it. A woman who keeps faith to be thanked is common enough. A woman who keeps faith in the dark, expecting nothing, and would be ashamed to be caught at it, that woman is rarer than anything I saw in 3 years of the world, and I will not be such a fool as to look past her a second time." He turned her hand over in his and looked at the ink stains on her fingers, the small, honest marks of 3 years' work. "Vivienne kept my heart for a season and set it down when it grew heavy. You kept my whole house for 3 years and never once set it down. I know now which of you loved me." "Your Grace." "Everard," he said, "you have paid my debts and dried my granaries and lent me your aunt's money and argued with the War Office on my behalf. I think you have earned my given name." A tear did fall then, one, and she dashed it away as though angry at it. "It was only that I could not bear," she said, "to think of you coming home to a ruin. Whatever became of me after, I could bear that. I only could not bear that." Everard lifted her ink-stained hand and pressed his lips to it, and held it there, and felt 3 years of cold go out of him in the warm library she had kept lit for a dead man's return. "Then let me tell you what will become of you after," he said. "You will not repay the estate your aunt's money, because you will be its mistress, and a mistress does not lend to her own house. You will not sit at the edge of any room again while I look past you at someone brighter, because I have learned that the brightest thing in any house is the one who keeps it warm. And you will not go on believing you had no right to write to me." He drew a breath. "You had every right. You have it still." Write to me for the rest of my life. Charlotte Prewitt, beginning tonight, beginning here, beginning by telling me plainly the thing you would not say a moment ago." She looked up at him, this quiet, faithful woman who had waited 3 years in the dark expecting nothing. And for the first time since he had entered the room, the dread went out of her gray eyes, and something steadier and far older took its place. "I loved you before you ever went away," she said. "I have loved you every day since. I kept your house because I could not keep you, and it was the only faithful thing left that I was allowed to do." "It is not the only one any longer," Everard said, and drew her in, and held her, mud and war and all. In the warm gold light of the room she had never let go dark. They were married quietly at Thorncliffe before the winter was out, in the little gray church at the edge of his own fields, with old Peary weeping in the front pew, and the tenants she had kept from leaving crowding the churchyard, to see the faithful sister become their duchess. He had learned the difference at last between a woman who dazzled at the center of a room and one who kept the lamp lit at its edge, and he spent the rest of his life making certain that the woman who had waited in the dark was never again overlooked in the light.